I had exactly 72 hours to keep a fence standing without letting my savings bleed out in $150 daily chunks, and every second felt louder than the last. The notice wasn't just a threat. It was a countdown shaped like a sheet of paper flapping against wood as the evening breeze ran down Willow Bend and rattled the slats. I kept hearing the math in my head. Day 1, day 2, day 3, then the snowball into real harm. Could I outsmart a ticking notice before it multiplied into a mess? Or would the committee make an example out of me for the whole cul-de-sac to watch? From the outside, the fence looked like ordinary cedar, a modest rise for privacy on a corner lot. From the inside, it felt like a line I had drawn to protect my peace after months of noisy lawn crews, string trimming at sunrise, and cars rolling to the stop sign like they were idling in my living room. When the association wrote that my fence ruined sight lines, I understood the word but not the intention. The word is about safe turns and clean corners. The intention here smelled like control dressed up as safety. Sprinklers ticked along the median, and the air carried that damp, cut grass smell that means somewhere a landscaper just finished a perfect edge. I didn't move to Willow Bend for drama. I moved for the welded swing in the picnic park. The curve of the road like a comma at the end of a long day. The promise that rules would keep the place pleasant. That's the trick of it. Rules can be shelter, or they can be the storm. The committee called my 30 inches of extra height a hazard. I called it breathing room. And as I looked at the 72-hour citation tacked to my gate, ink stamped in a bureaucratic blue, I understood two things at once. They were serious about the clock, and I was done letting strangers count my hours for me. This is a homeowners association drama. Yes, but I wasn't trying to start an HOA revenge story. I wanted a quiet life, petunias, Sunday coffee, and a fence that kept my dog from greeting every jogger like a parade marshal. Still, sometimes the shortest road to quiet runs through noise. Sometimes you endure a little spectacle to get your stillness back. And if there's a petty edge to it, well, I'm not above that. I believe in small, precise responses that make big machines grind. So I read the notice again. Violation, height variance at corner, sightline encroachment, corrective action required within 72 hours. It referenced Bylaw 8.4, corner lot visibility and right-of-way. That was my first evidence prop, and I tucked it with care into a plastic sleeve, a photocopied page labeled CC&Rs Section 8.4, corner lot visibility, slotted behind a tab in the 3-ring binder they gave me in the welcome packet. The binder had a cheerful cover photo with a sunrise behind ornamental pears. It looked like a promise. It felt like a dare. I promised myself this would not turn into shouting across hedges or late-night driveway standoffs. No yelling, no scenes, no mistakes I couldn't clean up. I would answer schedule with schedule, notice with notice, and small print with small print. And if the committee wanted to start a timer on me, I would start one on them too, if only to hear a second metronome in the room. The cicadas were humming along the green belt. The fence cast a clean rectangle shade. I drew a line down a legal pad and wrote, on the left, what they said I had to do, on the right, what I could do instead. At the end of that first hour, I had a plan that wasn't quite a plan, more of a promise to myself. I wouldn't lose a day to panic. I would use all 3 days as a stage, not a scramble. I would move in steps so measured that even if someone filmed me from behind a minivan window, the footage would look like a tutorial for patience. And yes, I'll admit it, I wanted it to end satisfying. Not explosive, not cruel, satisfying. Background setup sounds boring until you realize it's where the fuse lies. My corner lot sits at the mouth of the cul-de-sac, which means if you turn too fast off Willow Bend Drive, you could graze my lawn without noticing. The original fence, installed by the last owner, was low and pretty, but not practical. I raised it by 30 inches on the east side after a series of mornings where headlights spilled into the living room like surprise dawn. The wood smelled sweet that first day, sap bright and resin sharp, while a distant mower droned like an airfield. Our board has 5 members. The chair, Ms. D, wears a smile the way a gate wears a lock, present, polished, and necessary in her mind. The treasurer, Mr. L, believes every dollar that leaves the account you return with a full report and a witness. The secretary types minutes like court transcripts. The 2 directors are a rotating cast of volunteers. earnest and exhausted, herding cats with ballots. And then there's the unofficial six, the neighbor who walks every afternoon with phone in hand, logging every sidewalk chalk drawing, every trash can minute late, every pet stepping off common grass. Call it a pocket inspector. Call it a neighborhood Karen. I'm using a pseudonym here, Pam, but the vibe is familiar. It's the watchful certainty that rules shine brighter when they're pointed at other people. I learned the rule numbers faster than I learned the street names. CC&R section 8.4 talks about corner sidelines, nothing over 42 inches within a triangular area measured from the curb. The plat map in my welcome packet shows that triangle, a pale geometry drawn by someone who never stood on this lawn and heard the way kids laugh when their scooter wheels catch sunlight. My fence extension rides the edge of that triangle. Technically, the cap rail pushes a few inches over near the post closest to the stop sign. I didn't put it there to tempt fate. I put it where the ground rises slightly, which meant a cap rail that looked even from the street, even if the survey line dipped. I met the first pushback on a Sunday afternoon. I had set my grill under a blue tarp for shade, and as smoke coiled and hazed, a bored email hit my inbox. Observation of non-compliant fence height. The phrasing felt chilly, like I had been seen not as a neighbor, but as a file. I lowered my phone, watched the blue tarp ripple, and told myself not to respond hot. No one can read tone with heat and charcoal behind it. I took photos. I measured from the sidewalk up to the cap rail. 41 here, 43 there where the ground rises. Then I walked the corner where Willow Bend curves, and I tried to see what they meant by impaired sight. It looked like the same corner any suburban street has, a hum of nothing serious. The wind carried the faint sound of a garbage truck's hydraulic hiss far down the block, a kind of steel sigh. The first official letter, sent certified, came 2 weeks later. This one wasn't a warm warning with bullet points and smiley help. It was a 72-hour citation, immediate corrective action required. It threatened daily fines if uncorrected after the deadline. It referenced CC&R section 8.4 and appended a grainy photocopy of my fence with an arrow drawn in ballpoint pen. That letter is my second evidence prop. 72-hour citation dated June 3rd, and I taped the envelope itself inside my binder to keep the postmark. The committee gave me the stopwatch, and I set it down on my kitchen counter like a loud ornament. Why did they care so much about a slightly higher fence on one corner? Because order gets addictive. It's hard to maintain a scrapbook of pretty lawns and symmetrical mailboxes if someone's fence line refuses to align with the photograph in your head. It wasn't about safety alone. It was about controlled dress as care, and I had nudged the costume. I think that kind of power mistake creates what I call the hum of petty. You begin to hear it in every meeting note and every neighborly smile. At the next open meeting, I listened from the back. The association projected slides on a folding screen in the clubhouse, the air slightly overchilled, the projector fan whirring like a tired chorus. On a bullet list, way down after July 4th picnic logistics, was corner lot fence review. The board agenda excerpt is my third evidence prop. Board agenda, item 6B, corner lot fence review, printed clean, timestamp 7:10 p.m. They never said my name, which I appreciated. They said things like, a resident has adjusted a lot perimeter feature. They spoke in code like that to keep things civil. But I watched the way heads turned toward the window, toward the curve of the street where my fence sits like an accusation. I took notes. I took quiet breaths. I don't need drama, I told myself. I need distance. After the meeting, I thought about letting it go, cutting the cap rail down by an inch and calling it done. I could spend a Saturday with a circular saw and sandpaper. But then I saw Pam filming a slow pan of my corner from her car window, and it wasn't the documenting itself that got me. It was the way she smiled, tiny and satisfied, like a game piece sliding forward. That look said this wasn't about inches anymore. It was about a story where I would be the cautionary tale. If you ever lived near a watchful neighbor, you know the feeling. It's the sense that your mailbox lid and your leaf blower become part of someone else's plot. You start to narrate your actions in your own head, which is exhausting. You think in rules even before you act. That's where the fence became less about boards and more about boundaries. It turned me from a quiet guy on a corner lot into someone who could feel his heartbeat keep time with a citation clock. The sky pushed into midsummer blue. A truck backfired down on Maple Ridge, and birds startled from the maple by my patio umbrella. I could have paid the fine. A lot of people do, just to end the noise. But I knew if I paid without a fight, the board would have learned something about me that I wasn't willing to teach, that I would fold under the schedule of their choosing. I needed to teach the opposite, thoughtfully and completely, not to win a trophy, but to set a boundary that would hold when I needed it to hold again. Chapter 08:10. Conflict doesn't always announce itself with shouting. Sometimes it arrives as measuring tape stretched tight over public grass. On day one of the countdown, I found an orange triangle spray painted at the corner where the curb meets the sidewalk, the geometry of enforcement marked for anyone to see. The paint was fresh enough to shine a little in the sun. I knew it was meant to clarify the triangle, but it looked like target practice. I crouched, took a photo with a timestamp, and filed it under sightline markers. I walked the line of my fence and mapped where my cap rail crossed 42 inches. 3 spots, all small. I marked them with painter's tape in a color that blended into the cedar. If anyone asked, I had an answer. Yes, I see the inches. Yes, I am studying them. What they didn't see is the way I had begun to think, like a maze maker. Not to break anything, not to trick the law, but to cooperate with it in a way that would make the law work for me. Bylaw 8.4 talks about permanent structures. Fixed height within the triangle. It says nothing about modular elements that move when needed, nothing about privacy screens that reconfigure without tools. I kept reading the section until the edges of the page went soft. Pam did her slow loops like a planet with a camera moon. The treasurer stopped by once with a friendly nod and an awkward wave, like he was apologizing without saying it. I raked mulch into neat arcs at the base of the fence and considered how a good arc can redirect a gaze. In the heat, the sharp scent of cedar drifted, and a north wind carried a hint of lake air that tasted like tin. The first day ended without a fine. The clock read 36 hours left, and I wasn't behind. I was shaping the time. I drafted a letter, not to argue, not to scold, simply to mark my own schedule alongside theirs. I delivered it to the association drop box. Notice of intent to modify for Bylaw 8.4 compliance. Dated and signed. I referenced the 72-hour citation and noted my preliminary measurements. I requested confirmation that movable, non-fixed screens used temporarily for backyard privacy did not constitute a permanent structure under Section 8.4. The secretary would file it. The chair would read it. The treasurer would nod. And somewhere Pam would wonder why I looked relaxed. Think of a maze as a conversation with space. I began to source narrow, lightweight lattice panels that could connect with removable pins. Nothing bolted, nothing cemented, everything to spec. If I needed to demonstrate sight lines at any moment, I could pull pins and open a corridor through the triangle, proving that a driver could see the sidewalk and the corner without delay. And then, when the demonstration ended, I could reverse the pins and reassemble. Before anyone panics. This was not a trick to endanger anyone. I tested the view from the stop sign in full daylight and at dusk with my porch lights off. I walked the sidewalk corner to corner and checked the field of view. I confirmed it matched the printed diagram from Section 8.4 when the modular pieces were configured open. Safety held. The letter of the rule was satisfied in those moments, which meant I had options. Pam filmed. The board watched. And I used the association's own paper trail to keep my balance. By close of day 2, I submitted a second letter, supplemental photographs demonstrating conformance to CC&Rs Section 8.4 under temporary configuration. I printed each photo with a timestamp and put the camera angle, curb distance, and panel positions in the margin. The photos weren't meant to be pretty. They were meant to be undeniable. The wind shifted and carried the faint smell of someone frying onions and peppers down the block, savory in the late light. I also kept track of what the association did. A new email arrived with a PDF attachment that looked like a form letter. It reminded me of the daily fines if I failed to correct within the original 72 hours. It said my documentation was received and that the board would review at the next meeting. I printed that email and slid it into the binder, highlighting the phrase about the next meeting. If I could show that my response arrived in good faith before any fines were assessed, I could argue for suspension until review. I wasn't inventing a loophole. I was building a record that said I took the rules as seriously as the committee claimed to. I began to notice the rhythm of the cul-de-sac as a metronome for conflict. At 7, the joggers, faces forward, earbuds in. At 8:30, the strollers, small wheels rattling over seams. At 11, the contractor vans, backups beeping in neat little pulses. At 3, the school buses, their brakes whispering as they sighed to stop. And every hour, the clock down in my kitchen ticked me forward toward the deadline. I stayed steady. I stayed boring. Boring is a good strategy in a fight like this. If you give a committee a show, they start to set up a theater. I kept my project clean. No trip hazards. No exposed screws. No tools left where a phone camera could make them look like weapons against civility. I even swept out near the curb to remove the tiny cedar curls that sanding leaves behind. I was not giving anyone a photograph that felt like proof of being a bad neighbor. This wasn't a care neighbor drama where I become the villain by losing my temper. This was a careful, controlled response to a specific claim. If you were going to paint me as the big bad, you were going to need a better brush. Late on day 2, the secretary slid a note into my mailbox. Acknowledgement of receipt, notice of intent to modify. It was a single line with a date stamp from the office. I added it to the binder with a small smile. Paper is heavy in more ways than one. When you stack enough sheets, the pile becomes undeniable. I marked the ground with chalk in spots where the triangle began and ended. Measured from the curb, matching the spray paint but cleaner. Chalk washes away. Spray paint lingers. Chalk is neighborly. Spray paint is a warning. I wanted every passerby to sense that I was cooperating, not escalating. Cooperation pays long term. It softens a room when it's time to make your move. On the morning of day 3, the air felt different. It had that faint fuzz of heat that makes asphalt smell slightly sweet. A city truck rolled by, and a driver glanced at my corner, probably because the spray paint still glowed. The association sent a final reminder email at 9:02 a.m. It was short, formal, and chilly. It might as well have said, "The clock is our friend." I sipped coffee, adjusted a lattice pin, and told myself that the clock could be my friend too if I treated it right. I had one more step to take before the deadline. I needed to create a moment that forced the committee to see what the rule actually protected, not what they wished it shaped. But I also needed to avoid anything that smelled like public agitation. No flyers, no group chats, just me, the fence, and the text of Section 8.4, standing in the triangle like a student reciting a memory verse. The sprinklers came on across the street, and a fine mist drifted over the asphalt, catching sunlight like glitter for a breath. The countdown hits its last hour, and I'm about to make a move the committee didn't plan for. Because when a deadline becomes a weapon, the only real answer is to turn its edge. The last hour felt like a thread pulled tight across the cul-de-sac, humming if you pressed a finger to it. I rolled the lattice carts into their open configuration, pins pocketed. Triangle cleared exactly according to the diagram from Section 8.4, then stood at the curb where the orange spray lines met like an arrowhead. From that spot, a driver could see down both sidewalks in the first 30 feet of street in either direction. The view plain and unobstructed. I photographed it all with the sun at my back, so shadows wouldn't fake a blockage. The air carried a faint tar smell as heat lifted off the street, and somewhere a lawn sprinkler chattered like a mechanical bird. I submitted a third packet to the office slot, labeled Demonstration of Conformance Prior to Deadline. Inside were time-stamped photos, a map of panel positions, and a one-page memo summarizing that the configuration satisfied the visibility requirement in the critical zone. That memo wasn't emotional. It was boring by design, the kind of boring that makes a volunteer board feel the weight of acting contrary to evidence. I copied the notice clock at the top and wrote the hour I filed, 10:58 a.m., June 6. If they levied fines after noon, they would be doing it against a documented window where compliance was present. I wanted that tension on their desk. My plan didn't end there. After filing, I reassembled the privacy side within the yard line, outside the triangle, keeping the backyard screen from passers-by. I rotated panels inward so that from the street you saw a neat lattice and nothing else. It was not a trap. It was clarity, and I wanted it to feel like clarity. If the chair or the treasurer came by, they would find me with gloves, not attitude, with a binder, not a megaphone. At 12:07 p.m., a white SUV with the association logo glided to the curb and paused. Someone inside took a photo through the windshield. The SUV rolled forward without a wave. I watched it go, then checked my phone twice. No fine notice yet. The afternoon slid into that gentle buzz where small engines cook in the sun and the cul-de-sac floats in a quiet, so soft you think you can hear pine sap pop. By late afternoon, an email arrived. Compliance review scheduled for next board meeting. The daily fine was not applied, at least not yet. Instead, the board set a review date and asked me to attend. The words were polite, and the subtext was simple. We saw you move. We saw the clock. We're pushing this into a forum where we control the furniture. I printed the email and added it to the binder, labeled Compliance Review Notice, June 6. Section 3 of my story, call it Conflict Rising, had reached the edge of something harder. The committee had retreated to a meeting room, and that's where games either end or begin again. I slept light that night, listening to the whisper of air conditioning and the soft tick of the kitchen clock. The fence settled a little as it does, a hush against hinges, and I told myself that day 3 ended on a small, precise win. Not the war. Not yet. But a win you can hold in your hand like a coin. Escalation begins in paper and ends in people. The agenda went up for the June 10th meeting, and there it was in crisp font. 6B. Corner sight line. Resident modification. CC&Rs section 8.4. The chair added a sentence to the description box that made the hair rise at the back of my neck. Board may consider interim fines for periods of nonconformance. The sentence didn't say when they believed those periods occurred. It implied a bill could be built retroactively. I printed the agenda and highlighted that phrase. Evidence prop number for slid into binder. June 10th agenda, item 6B, interim fines. On June 8th, I found a bright yellow card slipped under my garage door. Site observation, non-compliant visual obstruction. It wasn't an official letter. It had no signature, just a date and a time window. That card became evidence prop number 5, labeled site observation card, June 8th, 2:15 to 2:45 p.m. The card unnerved me not because of the words, but because of the blank space where the observer's name should have been. It felt like a shadow sending mail. Neighbors began to hum with interest. People notice when lines appear on the curb and when boards schedule specific items with vague, heavy language. You can sense a story forming the way you can sense ozone before rain. I kept my head down and my yard clean, choosing to smile over any comment when I felt eyes on me. If there was going to be social pressure, I would not supply its narration. Yet the drumbeat moved from paperwork to people. By Sunday, the association newsletter draft leaked in the way things leak when a committee includes more than 3 opinions. Under community safety reminder, a bullet warned against unapproved changes to boundary structures that may endanger public sightlines. There was no name, but the photo looked suspiciously like my corner, cropped and desaturated. I screenshotted the draft and printed it with a footer timestamp. Evidence prop number 6. Newsletter draft screenshot, June issue. I doubled down on precision. On June 9th, at 6:40 p.m., I performed a full demonstration again, opening the triangle with lattice pins removed, then walking the driver's view with phone pressed at standard windshield height. I made notes of distances, listed right-of-way elements, and cited section 8.4 clause by clause in the margins. I even included a line citing the Municipal Traffic Engineer's Guidance document, which uses a phrase no permanent obstruction when defining corner safety triangles. The word permanent mattered. It was the difference between a fixed wall and a temporary screen. The wind pushed warm air across the cul-de-sac, carrying the smell of hot pavement and faint lake water. At the meeting, the chair called item 6B and introduced it like a weather report. Calm tone, serious map. I kept to my seat until invited, then presented the binder like a modest portfolio. The treasurer asked about periods of nonconformance, and the secretary pointed to dates. That's when the temperature changed. They had a printout of violation ledger, resident 14, with entries for May 29th, June 3rd, and June 8th. The ledger listed observed obstruction at those times and suggested a daily fine might apply between observation and correction. I requested a copy. They refused in the moment, but the ledger now existed as an object in the world. I noted down the title, Exactly, and added it to my mental list. Paper trails become either ropes or ladders depending on who hold the ends. The board did not levy an immediate fine that night. They tabled it to allow further observation, a phrase that tastes like waiting room coffee. But two things happened in the days after. First, the association posted the newsletter snippet to the community board near the pool. Second, Pam began walking with a measuring stick in open view, stopping at my corner, tapping the stick twice on the sidewalk, then jotting notes. It was theater, and the audience didn't know whether to clap or whisper. I felt the petty part of me stir. I wanted to answer theater with better theater, the kind that makes rules look back at themselves. Money at risk now. The treasurer's ledger implies retroactive daily fines, and even hints at a lien if unpaid. So I need a move that makes their own numbers turn against them. The association sent an email on June 12th. Final notice of continuing violation. The subject line was heavy with capital letters. The body cited documented instances of noncompliance and warned of initiation collections if fines were assessed and unpaid. There was the money edge. It was still a warning, not an invoice, but the gears were turning. I printed it as evidence prop number 7. Final notice, June 12th. The notice gave me two options: remove the extra height permanently in the triangle, or expect recurring penalties until verified correction. The word verified chilled me. It meant that even if I opened the triangle, they could call it unverified until someone from the board blessed it. They had written themselves into the role of priest. I filed a request for records under our state's nonprofit disclosure rules and the association's own CC&R provision for member inspection. In that request, I asked for copies of the violation ledger entries and all photos. I logged the date and kept the receipt stub in the office. Evidence prop number 8. Records request receipt June 13th. When people try to build a bill against you in the dark, the first light switch is paperwork. Meanwhile, I kept the lattice moving, demonstrating and documenting, never leaving the triangle block when I wasn't present to open it. I wanted to reduce discretion to 0. A week later, I received a thin packet containing 3 printed photos, all taken from poor angles. The ledger entries were redacted to protect volunteer privacy, but the times were visible. They had me blocked at 2:32 p.m. on June 8th, which was interesting because my own photos showed an open triangle at 2:45 p.m. that day. That 20-minute window became the fulcrum. The association's observation card had an open half hour. My demonstration fell inside it barely. If they were building a case for a fine per day of noncompliance, I could show that compliance existed within their observation windows. Not a trick, just a fact. And facts make better levers than outrage. The chair scheduled a compliance hearing for June 20th. The notice listed possible outcomes, including imposition of fines not to exceed $150 per day. It also noted that failure to pay could result in collections per CC&R Section 15.2, which is one of those clauses that keeps lawyers' lights on. The hearing notice, stamped and initialed, became evidence prop number 9. I felt the pressure shift from annoyance to risk. There was now a path from paper to money. If I misstepped, I wouldn't just be fussing with lattice. I'd be funding the operations of people who had decided my corner was a lesson. The hearing took place on a humid evening, with a fan turning lazy circles at the clubhouse ceiling. The committee walked through their photos. I walked through mine. They admitted that my open configuration satisfied the sight line during the demonstration. They argued that safety required predictability at all times, not just when I stood ready to pull pins. I countered, for the record, in calm narration, that Section 8.4 governs permanent obstructions in the triangle, and that my open configuration demonstrated a method to maintain compliance while preserving privacy elsewhere. The treasurer frowned at the numbers. The chair smiled without smiling, and Pam settled into a back row chair as if watching a matinee. They recessed for 10 minutes. When they returned, they said the board would issue a written decision in 7 days. That's the moment I understood fully. They didn't want a solution. They wanted a surrender. If they had wanted a solution, the meeting would have ended with conditions and a handshake. Instead, they took the power of the pause. The pause is pressure. Pressure is a lever. I decided to build my own. Recap at 24:00. The countdown spared me an immediate fine, but the board moved the fight into a room where they wrote the minutes and kept the gavel. A ledger suggests retroactive daily penalties. A final notice threatens collections, and hearing delays clarity while social pressure grows. I had to change the board's incentives. Not by rage, not by spectacle, by making their own rules pull my direction. The next morning, I filed a variance application, corner lot privacy accommodation, with references to Section 8.4 and the municipal guideline for corner triangles. I included a planned drawing of the lattice in both open and privacy positions, detailing that the panels within the triangle would default to open in daylight hours except when a resident occupied the backyard, then return open immediately afterward. I attached signatures from 3 immediate neighbors who confirmed the open view satisfied their comfort with children and pets on the sidewalk. I also enclosed a short memo about the HOA's duty to balance safety with reasonable residential use. The packet was mercilessly organized, hole-punch tabbed, and labeled. It was not a dare. It was a map. Section 4 of the story had one more turn. The board's written decision arrived on June 27th. Non-compliant structure. Fines to accrue for each day until permanent correction. There was the hammer. They offered me a half measure. Remove the extra height inside the triangle permanently, and they would waive the fines assessed to date. That offer wasn't mercy. It was a test. If I accepted, I would prove that the board could move me by threat rather than process. If I refused, I would wear a meter around my neck. But their letter had a vulnerability. It referenced an effective date of June 12th for the start of fines. I had the final notice of June 12th framed as a warning, not an invoice, and the records packet proving compliance within observation windows. Between warning and bill, there's supposed to be a bridge built on proof. I appealed for the CC&R appeal process. The appeal was not a tantrum. It was a ladder built from their own rungs. I challenged the effective date based on the demonstration record and asked that any fine matrix match verified noncompliance time blocks, not whole calendar days. If they wanted to be scientific, I would bring the scale. If they wanted to be arbitrary, I would make them say so on paper. Retaliation, my turn, didn't start with hardware. It began with a different kind of maze, committees and votes. I pulled a member list as allowed for campaign purposes. I built a 1-page brief titled Corner Safety with Privacy, a practical proposal, and I delivered it to doorsteps with a smile and no speech. The brief included a diagram, a measured explanation in plain language, and a line at the bottom. If you think this compromise should be up for a vote at the annual meeting, sign below to request board consideration. I did not ask for a recall. I asked for a conversation they would have to have in public. Something else moved while the signatures stacked. The landscaper contractor, under instruction, trimmed the hedges at the pool so far back that the sun blasted the deck. People noticed. Comfort vanished. The same newsletter that scolded unapproved boundary changes now had neighbors squinting at concrete with nowhere to hide from the light. The petty hum shifted pitch. Control dressed, as care was starting to look like control dressed as control. I walked the cul-de-sac at dusk, the sky violet and thin, and consider how to turn that pitch into momentum. I didn't need everyone on my side. I needed enough people to prefer clarity over force. The binder had grown heavy in my hand, a physical reminder that stories can be told with paper as well as voice. My appeal clock ticked. My signatures climbed past the threshold for a member petition for agenda item. My lattice panel stayed tidy, pins ready for the next demonstration on demand. Our hook. The social tide is turning, and a petition has traction. If the board tries to push fines into collections, I'm ready to answer with a public vote that uses their own meeting rules against the routine of retaliation took the shape of patients wearing armor. The petition crossed the threshold for an agenda item by noon on July 3rd. Signatures neat, addresses verified, and a cluster of handwritten notes asking for privacy without punishment clipped to the back. I logged each name in a spreadsheet and stapled a cover letter citing the CC&R provision for member-initiated business at the annual meeting. The summer heat pressed down and cicadas throb in the oaks, a dry electric tone that made the whole block feel wound tight. I placed the packet in the office slot with the same steady hand I used for first notice, then walked home by way of the pool where the trimmed hedges still left the deck squint bright. The lattice panels had become a ritual. Mornings, open configuration in the triangle, pins pocketed, binder on the patio table. Evenings, privacy mode restored, triangle still open, yard still quiet. I had built a choreography that made compliance boring to witness, but undeniable to record. It was not a trick. It was a proof you could set your watch by. I kept a log of every configuration change down to the minute, on the chance that someone tried to claim an invisible violation between granularity and guesswork. The board's response to the petition came fast and defensive. They issued an interpretive guidance on July 6 stating that temporary configurations that alter visibility during normal use periods may be considered functionally permanent for enforcement purposes. The phrase functionally permanent made me smile. It tried to pull my movable maze into the fixed frame of a wall. So their rule could bite. I printed the guidance and marked it as evidence prop number 10. Interpretive guidance, July 6, functionally permanent. I also added a copy of the municipal traffic guideline that used the phrase no permanent obstruction, underlining permanent, and placing the two documents side by side. I wanted anyone who flipped my binder to feel the friction under their fingertips. Meanwhile, fines had started appearing as line items on my online account ledger, dated retroactively to June 12th. The math came to 12 days at $150, a number designed to make a person sigh and surrender. I did not pay, and I did not ignore it. I wrote a short message to the portal disputing the effective date and attaching my configuration log for those days. I asked that any further enforcement wait until a member vote on the agenda item now scheduled for August 2nd. The portal confirmed receipt and, as always, offered no promise. The petty part of me wanted to write a dozen pointed sentences about how rules meant to protect sightlines were now being used to punish predictability. Instead, I did something quieter. I invited 3 neighbors to my patio at sunset and walked them through geometry, the logbook, and the proposed policy change on the agenda. I kept it narration only, no showmanship. They asked practical questions the board had never asked me, and when we were done, they signed on to a simple statement. We, adjacent owners, attest that the open configuration restores full corner visibility and that the privacy configuration outside the triangle imposes no hazard. I submitted that statement the next morning, time-stamped and initialed, a small weight placed on the scales. The board set a records audit appointment for July 12th, giving themselves a right to inspect my configuration log against a representative day. I accepted and suggested July 14th, when traffic past the corner will be steady with weekend errands. They agreed. At 9:05 a.m. on the 14th, the white SUV rolled up. The chair and treasurer stepped to the curb with clipboards, and the secretary, dignified as ever, carried a camera with a date overlay. The light was already sharp, the asphalt breathing heat, and the air tasted faintly metallic from the sprinkler mist blowing off the median. I ran the sequence. Open configuration. Photo at windshield height. Sidewalk view demonstrated. Privacy configuration outside the triangle. Photo again. Back to open in the triangle. Repeat. The chair watched with a measured expression, and the treasurer focused on angles and numbers. When they left, the secretary lingered and said, in a voice so mild it felt like a courtesy, that the board would review the audit at the August meeting. Not a promise. Not a threat. Just a reminder that the room where they keep the gavel still mattered. I gathered my binder and felt the balance shift a notch. They had documented compliance in their own hand. If fines kept ticking, they would do so against their own record. The maze had performed on cue. The triangle had opened like a curtain, and to show that remain was a vote with rules none of us could pretend were invisible anymore. The legal consequence edge arrives next week. A collections notice is rumored if I don't pay by July 20th, so my plan needs to make their enforcement look unreasonable on paper. The rumor took shape as a letter. Intent to refer to collections, dated July 18th, stating that if the ledger wasn't clear within 48 hours, the account could be sent for collection action per CC&Rs Section 15.2. It named the total: $1,800 in fines, $75 in administrative fees. The numbers sat there like a dare,